to this. This is our last talk on the Translation and Interpreting talk series for fall 2025. And it's been hosted by the program in Translation and Interpreting in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. My name is Laura Ramirez Polo. I'm the coordinator of the Translation and Interpreting program, and with me is also Miguel Jimenez, who is the director. And if you haven't attended any of our talks before, you should know that we are recording this session, and then we'll also be making it available lately. So we have roughly 60 minutes for today's session, which means that after our speaker has finished her presentation, which will be around 45 to 50 minutes, there'll be some time for questions. And we are using the Zoom meeting format, so you can use the chat or you can unmute yourself to ask your question. And now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who is Belén Agollo Garcia. And I'm going to hand out to Belén. And the title of Belén's presentation is The Present and Future of Game Localization, How to Get Started and Prepare for Industry Disruption. Thank you so much, Belén, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Laura and Miguel, for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here today. And thank you all for attending this session. I hope it will be fun and enjoyable and that you will learn something. Let me share my screen first before, and let me know if you can see it properly. You can see it now, right?
Yeah, we can see it perfect.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. So yes, I'm Belén. I'm based in Spain. I have a background in translation and interpreting studies as well. Here in Spain, I studied the bachelor degrees as well. And I've been in the industry for 15 years now, specializing in game localization. So I mainly worked on the game localization space, but also for some time on the multimedia space as well. So with traditional dubbing, subtitling for films, although I still feel my specialty is game localization. I worked in lots of different roles as a translator, project manager, director. I did lots of things. I also did a PhD because I was bored and I thought, why not do a PhD? Which was very fun because it was about how to integrate accessibility in immersive content, like 360-degree videos, virtual reality, and all that. And my focus was on how to implement subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing, and it was a really nice experience. And more recently, I've been involved in AI since for like 2-3 years now. AI applied for localization. My current role is Executive Consultant of Innovation at Terra Translations. As you can see, I'm very branded today with the PowerPoint and the background and everything. I invite you to go and visit Terra Localization's website and LinkedIn profile. We're always looking for talent. We have a very wide network of linguists, testers, and a lot of people work with us. So we would be happy to receive your information as well. And so my role there is Executive Consultant of Innovation. I'm supporting the company and our clients, making sense of AI, technology, and supporting them in making the right decisions and not just go crazy with AI. That's what I do every day. And I'm also the co-founder of a non-for-profit initiative called AI Localization Think Tank, which I will be sharing at the end of the presentation as well, where we are just creating content for the localization community for free, blogs, videos, and this type of content for everyone to learn more about how AI is impacting our industry, and let's try to navigate this together. Cool. So that's my presentation, very long. And now let's jump into the presentation for today. I have to say, game localization is my favorite thing in the world. When I was in the first year of my bachelor's degree, I was there and there was this talk about game localization, and it was the first time I was exposed to it, and it was Carmen Mangiron, who is a Spanish well-known academic and researcher on game localization, but she also was the Japanese into Spanish translators for Square Enix in Japan for many years. So she brought this topic to me. It was the first time, and it really changed my life to have her speaking to me about that, because at that moment I realized that I could actually work in the industry that I liked, doing the studies that I chose, which was translation and interpreting. So that's how I started to be inspired, and hopefully I can share some of the stuff that I learned through the years with you today. I want to start with the basics, okay? Because I think sometimes we forget about it, and I think it's good to start and also reference real research on what game localization is. Actually, this definition here is from an article from 20 years ago from Carmen Mangiron, the person that I just mentioned, and I'm amazed how relevant it is 20 years after it was written. It captures everything that now people are saying, player experience, cultural nuances, blah, blah, blah. Carmen said this 20 years ago, and now the industry seems to be rediscovering this. But I want to share this with you. So from a translation perspective, what's interesting about game localization is that it's a mix between audiovisual translation and software localization, because the games have all these strings with the menus and the buttons and all that, but it also contains subtitles, dubbing, and all sorts of audiovisual elements. So it's super interesting because it has everything that you can have in localization, basically. Um, then I love what they say here, that the localized product should retain the look and feel of the locally made product. So this is what basically the definition of localization: recreating a product in a target language and make it feel as if the product was created for them and not as something foreign. I think this is very important, and especially the last part, preserve the gameplay experience for the target players. Because when you are doing, for example, translation for books or for foreign movies and things like that, you might want to retain the foreign elements and the foreign flavor at some point, because it's a passive activity from the person who is reading a book or who is watching a movie. But with games, you are actually interacting with the game and you are supposed to do things. So the experience cannot be disrupted by the language. We cannot put language barriers or something that is strange there that will make the player or the user go like, what is this? And remove them from the immersion of the game. So I think that's very important to remember. Then game localization is also a very, very technical process. It's not just translating stuff in a Word document. On the contrary, it has a lot of different assets, resources that have to be implemented in a build, in a game build, and then that has to be tested by testers, and then those bugs that are found during the testing phase have to be fixed, and it's a very technical process. And the localization assets, as it says here, can include the translated resource files, the localized voiceover files, because games also include dubbing, the packaging material, the metadata, and so on and so forth. So it's a very technical process as well. And from a business perspective, and this is so relevant, this is also a bit old, this text, but it's still super relevant today, even more than before, because now with AI and with all the pressure that is in the industry, we need to remind people that localization is actually a revenue enabler. It's something that brings money to companies. It's not a nice to have thing that, well, I have to localize. No, you're making a lot of money thanks to the translators who are making this game available into another language, right? So I think that's something really good to remember, especially when you are marketing yourselves in the future as translators or whatever you want to do in your career, that you remind people that this actually has a business impact, what we do. Okay, so let's see some numbers about the gaming industry. I totally recommend you to check Newzoo. Newzoo is a research company that every year publishes a free report on the state of the gaming industry, and it's really interesting to look at these numbers. So for example, this is for 2025. Here we can see the total players by region around the world. So we have almost, well, 3.5 billion players playing games around the world. That's a lot of people. Most of them, more than half, are concentrated in Asia Pacific, which is really interesting. But also super interesting to me was to see that Middle East and Africa and Latin America are bigger in terms of users and players than North America, for example, or almost like more than Europe, for example, Middle East. Of course, there are bigger territories, but usually the players are concentrated, traditionally have been concentrated more in the Western countries. So it's good to see that the player base is being diversified across territories. However, if we look at this regional breakdown, but when for revenue, the numbers are quite different, right? Here we can see that Asia Pacific still is one of the biggest territories for revenue, so almost half of it. But then we can see that North America actually is one of the biggest ones as well, even if they have less players, but they have more money to spend. So therefore, there is more revenue coming from North America. And also Europe, even if it's a smaller territory, also there's more money, so they can spend more money. So there's more revenue coming from Europe. That's why most of the times game developers and publishers are prioritizing European languages to localize their games, also Asian languages. These days, there is no game without traditional Chinese, simplified Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and so on and so forth. So those are very strong languages these days in our industry. And that this is the reason, because there's a lot of business potential there. And then even in Latin America and Middle East and Africa are smaller in terms of revenue, probably because people usually play more to free-to-play games and are not spending that much money. But still, there is a lot of potential to grow there and to make games more accessible from a cost perspective so that companies can keep growing. And then something also very interesting regarding revenue and platforms. So because when we think about video games, sometimes we tend to think, I don't know, most people tend to think about like these big AAA games like The Last of Us and I don't know, the Assassin's Creed and the Call of Duty or whatever. But actually, the money is coming mainly from mobile gaming. Mobile gaming is more than half of the revenue, which is a lot. And why? Because those games are more accessible. Everyone is playing games in mobile. Even your grandma probably is able to play a game in her phone. So it's way more accessible. And then we have console and PC always there at the same level because people, yeah, usually it's almost even. But it's really interesting to see that mobile is one of the biggest markets because that also tells you where the needs of the market could be, where the money could potentially be. And again, if you're marketing yourself, maybe look into these type of companies that are creating mobile games and so on and so forth. And also regarding numbers, I really like this data that was shared, I think this year in GDC, although it says 2024, but it's from this year. But these are estimates for from 2024. But in Steam, which is a gaming platform where you can go and buy your games, probably the biggest one in the world right now for PC gaming, over 66% of Steam users have languages other than English set as their primary language, which means that people are really playing in other territories, and there is a business case for localization that is very clear here. It's really interesting to see that simplified Chinese is actually higher than English in terms of players. Of course, there is probably a bigger population, but it's super interesting to see how that breakdown goes. And the following one is Russian. Russia is also such a big market for video games, and super interesting as well. The next one is Castilian Spanish, which is like, we are such a small country. How many people are like going to Steam and play games? But apparently a lot, because we are the fourth country. And then we have Brazilian, Portuguese, German, Korean, French, Japanese, and so on and so forth. You can have the list here. But yeah, just to have it in mind that, you know, there is a lot of diversity, and game publishers and game developers need to have this data in mind. And you too, when you're trying to market yourself, this is good information that you can share to make a business case for localization. Okay, let's talk a little bit about content types. This is a little bit of a boring slide, but I'm planning to share this PDF with Laura so that she can share it with you. So I wanted to provide this information for your reference. But basically, there's a few content types when we deal with game localization. First of all, we have the in-game text, which is what is inside the game, right? And within that, we can break down into mainly two: UI, the user interface, and then the cinematics, or when there is voiceover and where there are characters speaking. And this it's very tricky to localize games. For example, with the in-game text on the UI, we have character limitation. Still, we have character limitation these days. Like even if there is more awareness of localization, game developers sometimes don't give enough space for other languages that are different from English. So the other day we were doing Terra, we were doing a translation test. And there was such a strict character limitation, and the poor German team was crying because it was impossible for the German team to come up with solutions, because German is such a more expansive language compared to English. The Thai team was also suffering. So this is something that it also makes you be more creative, because you have to look for solutions that are good for the character limitation, even if they are not your first option. So it makes you think a lot about it. Then use of variables and placeholders, and we will see some examples that go within the text that then will be replaced by something else. Conversion is very important: time, date, currency, measurements. I mean, this is a typical thing in localization, but this happens a lot in video games as well. Lack of context is a big thing. When you're translating maybe a movie or a show or a video, you have the images. In gaming, you have nothing. You have a spreadsheet with the strings, maybe with some ID information to tell you a little bit about it, but there is absolutely no context at all. So that's why understanding the game mechanics from before, it's really important. Also knowing specialized terminology, having creativity and humor. There's so much humor in gaming. Transcreation, sometimes you have to really change the meaning of the text to make it work for your target audience. A lot of intertextuality. Intertextuality means that there are references to other movies, books, songs, and things like that. The other day in this translation test, there was a string which was an achievement. An achievement is some games, if you're not familiar, you have achievements, means that if you complete, I don't know, this thing in the game, they will give you a badge that you achieved this. So there was an achievement that was called "Oh my," like "Oh my God," but just "Oh my" and exclamation point. So apparently that was a reference to the Wizard of Oz, and I was like, I would have never thought about that, but luckily the translators were super smart and they found that out. So they went to the movie, into the dubbed versions of their language, and checked how that line was actually translated in the movie, which was really interesting. And then it's super important as well to use inclusive language, because the games are mostly created in English, sometimes in Japanese, but most of the times we would translate from English, and English doesn't have gender, as we know. So many times we would, even just welcome to the game in Spanish would be a problem because it's a gendered word. For example, bienvenido, bienvenida, bienvenidas. You could use a different phrase like te damos la bienvenida instead, to be more inclusive. So things like that all the time in the games you will find. Then in-game for cinematics, you need to know dubbing, like you need to know how to write the scripts for dubbing. You have some constraints like lip sync, character limitation as well when we work with subtitling. It has to be written to be said, so it's natural when you say it. So something that some normal people in that context would say. The other day, I don't remember how the translator translated a line into Spanish, from English into Spanish, but it was something like it was something like, we have good news, and in Spanish he translated it as tenemos fantásticas noticias, and I was like, no one says that in Spain. I mean, you can say it, but it's not so idiomatic, and someone would say tenemos un notición, which would be much more idiomatic. So things like nuances like that, when you're translating for a dubbing script in a game, it's something that to really think, how would you say this, or how the character would really say it if it was in your culture. Um, and of course, there are different registers. If you are translating a medieval game, you have to know how people talked in medieval ages and things like that. Characterization, we will see some examples, accents, idiosyncrasies of specific characters, again, transcreation and specialized terminology. We also have player support and documentation, which is more like easier type of text. You want to be concise, clear, accurate. Something that is important is term consistency across documentation and UI. So if the article, the support article, is referring to a menu in the game, you have to make sure that you're using the same terminology and not doing something else. Otherwise, it would be very confusing. Platform terminology as well. So if there is PlayStation terminology, Xbox terminology, Nintendo terminology, needs to follow the official guidelines, and again, understanding game mechanics. Then marketing, there's so much marketing material around gaming. It's not only the game, but all the email, the blog, the game stores, the social media, the ad campaigns, there's so much there. So there you have to do marketing translation, basically. Be catchy, hyper localized language, inclusivity, again, conversion. This is a silly thing, but sometimes there is like, this game will be released this day, but maybe in Australia is a different day, or in Thailand is a different day because it's already the next day. So these type of things need to be taken into account. And then culturalization as well, like does this campaign resonate in the target culture? Can we adapt something? And last but not least, there is also legal content, actually, the most boring part for me, but it's very important because it's like terms and conditions and contracts and things like that that are very important for the company. So here you need to know legal jargon, terminology, and it's a very high stakes type of text because it can have legal implications for the company. So accuracy is really important. Now let's look at some quick examples of what I was describing before. So this is an in-game example where we see the placeholders, right? So here you can see this. The sacrifice would be an ability for a given character in a game. Here, level will be replaced by a number, probably. Cost will also probably be replaced by a number that its mana is what it will cost, how many points of mana will cost. Then cooldown is the number of seconds that you need to recover that skill once you have used it in the game, and so on and so forth. So here you can see how these placeholders are all over the place. You need to understand what those placeholders mean. Of course, they cannot be translated. This should be tagged and protected in the cat tool, but if you see something like this and it's not protected, you should maybe ask the project manager or the team members that just to confirm that this does not need to be localized, but most of the times I can assure you it won't. So anyways, but this is an example of how it would look like. This is one of my favorite examples ever of how games are created with English in mind and they don't consider the other languages because, and actually in the test that we did, I will share the example, but something similar happened a few years after this example came up, so we're still there. So here it would be an example in a game with animals that it says there's a animal name that will be replaced by any animal in the game in the woods. And then for the plural in English, there are three whatever animal and one S in the woods. Great, it works for all the names of the animals in English, like zebras, cavern lions, saber-toothed tigers. It works perfectly. But if you have to localize this into Spanish or any other language, it won't work. If you add, maybe for zebra it works, but for león de las cavernas it doesn't work, and for dientes de sable it doesn't work to add an S at the end of the word. So one way to deal with this is to paraphrase it. And what ended up being in the game was hay un ejemplar. So there is one type of this animal in the wood, and then you remove the problem there. But this is something that happens very often. And this, sorry, there are too many bad words in this slide. I'm sorry about that. But this is a real example of a real game that I worked many years ago. They were very nasty. But this is what sometimes you have to translate. So you have to be up to date with all the bad words in your language. But basically, you can see here how file would look like. So you would have the string ID with some information, the character who's speaking, so John, Sherry, player, whatever, the source text, the line target, which means who you are talking to, which can be very relevant in terms of the gender that you have to use for in your translation and so on and so forth. And then localization direction, informal. Thank you, developer, for telling me that this was an informal register. I couldn't have guessed it just reading the text. But anyway, sometimes there is more interesting information there. And usually this is what you would receive. This is the type of script that you would receive. Things to take into account is that in gaming, the same script is used for subtitles and dubbing. So it's exactly the same script. There are not two versions as it happens in movies or shows. When there are only subtitles in the game, okay, you can translate it and that's it. When the script needs to be recorded, what happens is that the text has to be updated after the recordings to exactly match what is said. I don't know why in gaming they are so obsessed with this, but it needs to be exactly what is said, which is not the case in other audiovisual content that is out there. So that's something to take into account. Another thing to take into account is that not always there is character restriction in when localizing this type of scripts for subtitles. So sometimes that's a problem because in games you sometimes will see that there are super long subtitles with like I don't know how many 100 characters in a line, which are really difficult to read, and that's a problem. But when there is dubbing, usually you have restriction of characters because it has to match the length of the original audio. And another tricky part about dialogues is that they are not always in the dialogue order. So you can receive random strings that are not necessarily part of the same conversation, especially in games where there are lots of random lines, like a war game where you like throw the grenade or do this or do that, and like there is not really a conversation but just a bunch of people shouting to each other. Um, Another thing that's interesting and challenging is the characterization of some characters that might be in the game. So trolls are one of the races within the World of Warcraft universe game, and they speak with a very specific dialect. Here it says it's loosely based on Caribbean and African accented English, and they use certain aspects, no, in English. And here there is a sample of the dialogue in English with, with that and this, which is written the way I say it, because I'm Spanish, and I don't say that, but I say that, but so I might be a troll maybe. But yes, you can see that it's a very specific way of writing it, and so you have to decide a way of how to localize this into your language, and also be consistent, because once you decide which characteristics are you going to use, these trolls are all over World of Warcraft, so you will always have to be consistent. Here is an example of the in-game translation into Castilian Spanish. They use like certain mechanisms such as removing certain words, letters, like instead of encontrado, encontrado. Also as removing some in a more, maybe, I don't know, Andalusian way, perhaps. I don't know, Miguel. I don't want to offend Andalusian people, but it removes the S here from estarán, and it's like estarán orgullosos de morir por la causa. They decided to do certain things, but in a coherent way. Just for fun, I asked ChatGPT to translate this with context, and this is what it came up with, which to me is not as good as the human translation, but it tried to do something like um, doing the aspiration in the S here, but instead of with an accent, it did it with an H. But then it did weird stuff like this sentence is to normal, for example, and then it put an H here in ahora, which makes no sense to have that H there. And then pensándolo has a typo because it's supposed to have an accent. And yes, and then it's a nosotros with Z, but then in the other words with S, they didn't change it. So it's very inconsistent and weird. So I think we are good for now for this type of creative translations. And then when it comes to marketing, it's super important to really captivate the audience and create catchy solutions. No, so I remember this example from many years ago. Now it's very famous because of the Pedro Pascal TV show, but before it was that mainstream, there was this game who was released many years ago, and they had, it's called The Last of Us, of course, and it had this tagline with the trailer, which was, "Will you be the Last of Us?" And then because the name of the game was, the title of the game was not localized in any language. In Spanish was also The Last of Us. It was never localized, and in other languages as well. So it would not make sense for the translation to try to replicate this because it's impossible, as you cannot use the title of the game. So in the Spanish version, they changed it to sobrevivirás, will you survive, which is the same meaning, but it's punchier. Like it has more power than serás el último de los nuestros or serás el último entre nosotros, which is what ChatGPT gave me, which I don't like, and it's basically a literal translation. So yes, in these cases, there will be many times that you will be facing, if you decide to go into this industry, this type of decisions, what makes more sense from a marketing perspective and for the target audience. Okay, just a second, I need some water. Thank you for your patience. Okay, now, importance of culturalization. I think culturalization is an intrinsic part of video game localization. In some of other industries or verticals, sorry, culturalization is something different, but here I feel like it's impossible to localize a game without having culturalization in mind, no? Which is the process of adapting the game content, not only the text, but also other elements like the visuals or the character designs, the storylines, symbols that might appear in the game, and so on and so forth. And I will share some examples now, but I really like this comic thing that has so many years, but I think it still conveys that spirit of localizing and culturalizing a game, that it needs to be adapted for different these are very cliche stuff, so but just to show a way how a game can be appealing to different cultures, right? And we have the Americans, the German, we will talk about why the German is a clown in a minute, but then Korean maybe more like futuristic, and Japan will be more like manga-like and all that to make it more appealing. So this is what localization, like culturalization means basically. And I want to share some examples of real life examples of culturalization. So there was this game, Final Fantasy X. This is I saw there was a video on YouTube actually explaining this example. So it's very interesting culturalization example, because basically in this game there are these two characters, Yuna and Tidus, and they are not a couple, but you can feel like there's love between them all the time. And unfortunately, sorry, spoiler alert, at the end of the game, Yuna dies, is killed. And before she dies, she looks at Tidus, and in Japanese, she said arigato, which means thank you, as you probably know. And the translators of the other languages thought that that was too weak after such an intense love story, such an intense game, just to say thank you in Spanish or in French or in German or in English even was too weak and was not going to be well received. It's like, come on, Yuna, just thank you. I mean, the guy helped you all the game. So anyways, so they decided to adapt it into I love you. And all the languages follow that too. So that, to me, that's a very good culturalization example of how something needs to be more explicit into some other cultures, while in Japanese doesn't need to be so explicit because it's it's there. But anyways, I like this example very much. Then flags and symbols. So what you see on the left is the flag of the Spanish the República, which is a political symbol in Spain, very loaded. And what happened is that in a game, they were adding an expansion with like football teams, and the Spanish football team, the equipment, the T-shirt had these colors, the Republican Spanish flag. So the testers actually warned the development team and said, hey, this is loaded, I mean, you can use it, it's not bad, but it has some political meaning in Spain. So thanks to the testers, they could remove that from the game and adjust the colors, and the game was released with just the Spanish red and yellow colors without the other one, without the purple. So that was a win for the testers because they avoid a potential, I don't know, misunderstanding in the game. And then this is a classic, the swastika. In many Japanese games, you find this symbol, the one on the bottom. And as it says here, this was evil, but this is not, because that swastika in some Indian religions means good fortune, means positivity, means great things. Actually, the word swastika comes from Sanskrit, as you can see here, which means conducive to well-being. So it's something very, very positive in some Asian cultures, and this has been appearing in many games for many years. And the other day I was looking at Reddit, and people are still offended that in some games there are still these things, and it's like, yeah, it's another culture. But in some cases, the developers, for example, in Final Fantasy and other games, removed this symbol from the localized versions to avoid any issues. Then this is related to the clown from the German in the previous slide. There's a lot of censorship. Traditionally, there's been a lot of censorship in Germany when it comes to games. The authorities there are very strict when it comes to games. And actually, I remember the European version of Resident Evil 3. Even in the Spanish version of the game, you could select in the options to have green or gray blood and disappearing corpses, because it removed all the gore. There was too much gore in those games, like a lot of bloods and and you could actually select that. But in Germany, it was compulsory. And there's been happening for many years that some games couldn't be released in Germany because of the authorities not deeming the games appropriate for the audiences. Another example, Australia is also the other one who is pretty strict for video games. And this is the one on the right is a screenshot from Fallout 3, which is a game which also has a TV show now, by the way. Because I mean it's a post-apocalyptic game, and like they are not very happy there, and so on and so forth. So the developers allow the players to take drugs to cope with the horrible situation that they are dealing. And for the Australian authorities as well, that was unacceptable. They could not allow the drug usage and drug abuse in a game that was going to be commercialized in in Australia. So instead of saying morphine, they changed the name to MedX, so that it was not so explicit that the substances that they were using were real drugs, but it could be something invented. So this is also a way of culturalizing the game. So yeah, those are some of the examples that we had in the culturalization. Now, quality strategies are shifting a lot in the past few couple of years, I would say. Um, Especially on the buyer side, the gaming companies are reevaluating what quality means, and I'm listening lots of conversations saying that, linguistic quality is not like the golden standard anymore, but it's more about the impact that it has in the user, the outcome that that text that is localized creates in the end user. So here is just an example of like the types of bugs that could be reported during an LQA pass, right? And there are tons of language related ones, some that are user experience, so cultural things like the ones that we described, the Spanish Republican flag. It can be that there is a reference to another IP that is very important and is being mistranslated. It can be the tone, the context. And then there is also the user interface, of course, the more technical part where like, the buttons have to be read properly, not truncated text, not text that is outside of the window that it's supposed to be, and things like that. So this is an example of the bugs. But do all bug categories impact the player experience equally? And I think that the language related ones, the ones like if there is a typo or a slight mistranslation, the impact on playability usually is low. The impact on brand reputation usually is low unless it's related, for example, to MT, in the sense that the game is completely localized with machine translation and it's just gibberish and it makes no sense. In that case, it can have an impact in the brand reputation. When we talk about user experience, so for example, a culturalization issue, as we described before, the impact on playability is probably low because the people can still play the game even if there is the Spanish Republican flag in the equipment. But the impact on brand reputation is very high. It can create a backlash. And then when it comes to user interface, the impact on playability is very high because if it's not properly localized, the buttons are all over the place and things like that, you won't be able to play, so you will have negative reviews as well. And the impact on brand reputation, I think it depends on how bad it is. If it's really unplayable, then you will get backlash. So starting to see how the things that we do connect with all the impact on the end user, I think is a trend that I'm seeing more and more. So we are moving from understanding quality as linguistic quality only. Linguistic quality is still important, but it's not the only thing. To success, which is content performance. How is the content performing? How is the players, the users feeling about it? And this is just an example using the previous table, no? So for an in-game UI, apart from the linguistic quality, what would be the expected outcome, the success? Playability without disruptions. And what could be a success metric beyond it's correct in grammatically correct and is well translated well? Sentiment analysis. Are there positive feedback on player forums on the reviews of the store and things like that? Another example, player support. It needs to be informative. Maybe you have low support tickets for a given locale because the translation was very clear, very good. If you have a spike in tickets, perhaps there is some issue there with the language. For a marketing email, you want to trigger an action from the player, and the success metric could be high click-through rate, and so on and so forth. So I'm starting to see that quality is shifting towards looking at this type of metrics, although they are not so easy to track, but the more advanced localization programs on the buyer side are looking into this more and more. So that just to give you some insights into what's going on. Then workflows and processes. How do we actually do the work? we have different services in our industry, right? We have text localization, audio and video localization, and LQA testing. Those are the three main verticals. Within text localization, we have TP, which means translation, editing, and proofreading, sorry. MTP, machine translation, post-editing, then transcreation, culturalization, language assets maintenance, and so on and so forth. For audio, we have voiceovers, subtitling, access services like audio description, for example. This is something that we are doing as well for trailers specifically, and video and image localization. The trailers and the videos you need to also be localized in the image as well, not only the text and the subtitles, but also the images that appear. That is something that happens in our industry as well. And then LQA testing. This is such an important part in the gaming industry. Is once everything is translated and implemented in the game, then the actual tester goes into the game and makes sure that all works properly. Well, and when we talk, so those are the main services. When we talk about workflow for game localization, this is in an ideal world scenario type of workflow where the company starts with the internationalization of the game, which means that they will take into consideration that, other languages have gender and that, they are longer and you have to provide buttons that are dynamic and can be expanded for certain languages, and so on and so forth. Then it would be a familiarization stage where, in an ideal world, again, the translator could even play the game or at least look at the reference materials. Then you could, and this is an important part that I think it still happens, is more realistic, that you create a glossary and a style guide so that all the translators working in the project can have this consistency. Then you translate, then you produce the voiceover, then you do the LQA pass, and then master up and sign off. It's more for consoles, where you have to go through the certification stage where all the terminology is right. Also the age rating, which is something I haven't mentioned, but the age rating, the same as with movies, you have mature and things like that. In games we have the same, and so on and so forth. That's in an ideal world. What happens in the real life is that most games these days that are successful are GaaS, which means game as a service, and not so much the traditional game format. So there are games that all the time are creating content. It can be Fortnite or League of Legends or Blizzard games as well, or mobile games like Candy Crush, which is continuously creating more and more content all the time. So to have the player hooked there. So in this scenario, it's not as ideal as I just described before, because first of all, there is simultaneous shipment, so everything has to be launched the same date. There is continuous localization, so you are all the time, every day, receiving small updates for the game, or for the email campaign, or for the new strings that will appear in the game, and so on and so forth. The turnaround times are very short, so they are shrinking and shrinking because time to market is crucial for monetization. So companies need to be on top of mind all the time with the players, so they want to put more and more content out there. We see the same in Netflix and all these guys that are also creating more shows and more movies all the time, because you want the people to be there and keep paying the subscription, and so on and so forth. There is a lack of context, as I mentioned, because you're not seeing the game, you're just seeing the spreadsheet. Localization is still most of the time at the end of the production cycle. Until the game is not finalized, you cannot start the localization. And that means that you're at the end of it, and then everyone is in a rush for the game release. So that's also difficult. And then multiple translators, linguists are working at the same time in the same project. It's not like one translator and one reviewer will work into a project, but probably 20 translators and 3 reviewers will work into a project, which also makes things more complicated. When it comes to technology stack, I don't know if you study CAD tools in the program. Laura, you will tell me later. But I guess so. And so there are a few translation tools, CAD tools like MemoQ, for example. I put the little crown here because to me MemoQ is the queen of the game localization processes. It's usually the most used across the board tool. But I'm seeing other tools such as Marling and crowding being utilized by some of the companies. And then you also have content management systems or CMS. Gridly is one of them, but Gridly, it's very popular and it's very good tool as a content management system, and actually has a partnership with MemoQ, and they are integrated. So it's really convenient. And most of the times also the game developers have their own content management system, which is proprietary, which is basically where they concentrate all the text that they produce, and then they extract the text from there and update the translation there, and so on and so forth. For multimedia, if you will ever want to be, for example, a project manager for multimedia projects or for audio projects, you at least need to be familiar with these tools. Reaper and Pro Tools are audio workstations, which basically are used for dubbing. So this is mostly used for the audio engineers, but you need to understand what is a Pro Tools sessions, what is inside the Pro Tools sessions, how the dubbing is structured within these tools, and so on and so forth. And then for video localization, it's Premiere, Adobe After Effects, and this type of tools that are also leveraged for video localization. So again, if you have knowledge about these tools, that's a point for you, because you will be able to understand this and perhaps be a multimedia localization project manager or something like that. And for LQA, it's basically Jira and TestRail are the two main tools. There are others as well, but basically those are databases where you centralize the bug reporting. So when a tester is testing a game, okay, I'm testing the game, okay, I saw an error, then you have to go to Jira and create a ticket and add all the information. I found this thing, I arrived to this part of the game doing this, this, and this. This is the issue. This is what needs to be done, to be fixed, and so on and so forth. So these are the tools that are basically leveraged by the different teams. And when it comes to reference material, so we have linguistic resources, as we said before, style guides, glossaries, translation memories, QA settings in your CAD tool. So automated checks and things like that that you have to run, so you are sure that everything is right. You also have game resources to fill the gap of not having the game in front of you. So you have game design documents, you can have screenshots, you can have reference information in the source document, you can have cinematics, previous games if it's part of the same universe, internet resources like wikis, Reddit is full of knowledge, publicly available, and things like that. Actually, previous games is also very important these days, because now the biggest games, the ones that are sold the most, are remakes. It happened with the movies as well. I think it is still happening for that we have more and more remakes of the same 90s and like 80s movies done again and again. So it happens something similar to games as well. And then project resources, you have queries and answers sheet, which is basically where the translators will put the information when you have a question because you have no idea what's happening. In like, there's no context here. Please, developer, can you tell me what's going on? So you have access to the developer through these queries and answer sheets. You can also ask your project manager or the other linguist in the project. And I know I'm going a little bit over time. Laura, will you bear with me? Thank you. Sorry, I warned you before that I'm the worst. Sorry. I promise it's just a little bit more. But yes, when it comes to roles and skills, to me, the game localizers are the elite athletes of the localization industry, because it encompasses so much knowledge that people working in this field have to acquire, like advanced language and writing skills, deep cultural knowledge, terminology command, technical expertise, because it's a very technical process, marketing and SEO pro as well, UX design, project management, business acumen, audiovisual also knowledge, gamer experience, testing fluency, research skills, great imagination and creativity, because games are super creative products, and much more. So here, just showing some of the language related jobs that I find that are needed these days. And this doesn't mean that you have to be one of them. Actually, I think that a linguist these days needs to be all of these to kind of stand out in the crowd. Um, because being a translator reviewer is great, but if you have more specialization, like for example you specialize in dubbing, and you can also become an audio project manager or a dubbing script writer, or you're a cultural strategist, you're a culturalization consultant, you don't only think about the words, but you think about the whole context and how that content will resonate and how will it impact the end user. Also having UX knowledge, like user design, user experience design knowledge is really interesting these days. There is a lot of talk about UX writing and all that. And if you have that as an add-on, that's great. Knowing about CEO or now GEO with the generative engine optimization is also very important, because there's so much information about marketing that needs to be localized for the games as well, and marketing experts. So having a little bit of everything, usually, or specializing at least in some of these niche to have an add-on, would be interesting. Then management related jobs, project managers. There's always a company looking for a project manager somewhere. So I really encourage translation students to try and be a project manager, because you learn so much from being a project manager as well. And then you have a much holistic view of the whole process. You can also be a vendor manager. Very difficult job, very requested as well, which is manager are the people looking for translators for a specific project. So for example, there is a new client saying, I need now to localize all this into all these 20 new languages. So vendor management would be the team that would go out there and look for translators, negotiate with them, test them, and so on and so forth. Then on the client side, on the game developer side, there is localization producers, so it's some sort of project managers, but more embedded on the client side. LQA leads, dubbing leads, people who are specialized only in overseeing the dubbing for all the IPs, for all the languages. Language producers, I'm with some of the clients that we work, there are also language producers, which means the person in charge of the quality of that language for the whole company and for all the IPs. And then also directors and VPs. I mean, sky's the limit for you guys. I'm sure you're super smart, so who knows if you will end up being a director, managing multiple people. And then also technology related jobs, localization engineers, the ones that are in charge of preparing the files, preparing the workflows, integrating the technology, integration experts, machine learning experts, now with the AI implementation experts. There's many companies looking for this type of profiles, or innovation leads, for example, as well, like looking for the new technology, informing the team how they can leverage and be more efficient, and so on and so forth. I really like this. I will share it with you because maybe you cannot see it very well, but I really like this infographic created by Adam Wooten, where it shows all the possibilities that a translation interpreting student can achieve through the course of your career. So that's pretty cool. For more information.
We have him. Laura invited him like a year and a half ago.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
So, also, Karma Mangiron was also a year and a half ago. So everybody you mentioned has been with us.
Oh, that's great.
now
That's
you're
a
one of
good
them.
sign. I hope that's a good sign. Thank you. Okay, so just that's at the end of the presentation. So how to fight against the AI disruption. I used to say, very convinced of some years ago, that the last bastion of human creativity was game localization. These days, I am not so sure, because I'm seeing some clients already using AI or machine translation for games as well. But anyways, I still feel that in the game localization industry, they are not leveraging AI as much as in other industries, especially like Japanese companies. It's a no-go for them to use machine translation, and not everyone is using AI, honestly, for so I still believe this, but for now, I'm not that sure anymore. Um, and something that for me it's important, and not only for you as a translator or whatever you do in the future in this industry, hopefully you will succeed in many ways, but also even for LSPs and translation agencies like the ones that I work for, it's very important to tell the right story to show our worth. I'm sorry to tell you this, but we need to show our worth all the time. It's not a given that like translation and localization is something great, because especially now with technology, everyone is like, people who don't know that much about translation is like, what? But you can use ChatGPT to do it. So why are you still paying humans to do this? So it's a continuous effort to keep showing our worth and keep showing our value. But I think sometimes we've been mistaken because we use the wrong stories or the wrong data to convince people. Like if I show you, look how good quality I am providing with these MQM evaluation scorecards, like, I don't have that many errors anymore because my translators are too good. A stakeholder on the business side won't care about that. It doesn't tell anything to that person. But if you talk about the return of investment of localization, so how much revenue is coming from outside the production country, or you talk about player satisfaction metrics, maybe you can look at the positive reviews that the game got in a specific territory, or acquisition and retention metrics, how many monthly active users do you have for the game, and so on and so forth. Those are data that you can leverage to build a more compelling story. Something that I've also been seeing that is important, for example, for gaming companies, lots of them are interested in inclusive language. It's a big deal for them. Games need to be immersive and representative of all the players. Again, as I said, it's not a passive product that you just watch or read, but it's a product that you play and that you are immersed in the story. So you want to be represented in the story. You want to be able to relate to the characters. So that's why I think they care so much about inclusive language, to really create something that is not leaving anyone behind, creating locally resonating experiences. And we can think back about the culturalization examples that we discussed. And something that is really cool that it happened this year is that Steam, which is this platform that I mentioned before where you can buy all these video games, now you can filter the reviews per language, which is really interesting because it will give you some information about the quality of the localization. So if you're seeing that, all the languages are okay, but then simplified Chinese is mostly negative, what's going on there? Is it the localization? Is it something else? What's going on there? So I think, and I told this to the other, I was in a meeting with lots of deans from translation studies in Spain recently, and I think there is such a great amount of information here in STEAM that can be used to create a thesis or something. Like you have to do dissertation or something about localization, like analyze the data that is here, see what's interesting, and help us build a business case for all of us so that we can continue saying and showing with data the value of localization. So really a great resource. Actually, related to that, there was a big backlash recently with this game, Hollow Knight Silksong, that got super horrible reviews in Steam for Chinese. And it was like a big thing, and the developers had to apologize to Chinese players, and they had to retranslate the whole game because it was such a fiasco. So, these type of examples also help you create this story about why localization is important, but not only localization done by a machine, but real good localization by experts. something that you can use as well as an ammunition to make a case for our worth is this, because if many companies are saying, well, we can use LLMs for localization, blah, blah, blah. But more and more, the talk right now in the industry is that LLMs are not culturally attuned and they are very biased by default. And actually, there was this Harvard University study which I found this really fascinating. How close are you to the way ChatGPT thinks? I don't know where you are in the map, but for some reason, GPT is very German. I didn't know that. But you can see how GPT is close to the countries in this red bucket, but how about Indonesia or Ethiopia or Egypt or Maldives, Lebanon, Peru, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Guatemala, Mexico, all those countries that are so far away, which means that the cultural nuances will be lost using LLMs for localization. They are quite biased, so or even for Thailand, South Korea, and so on and so forth. So that's also an interesting data point to share. Just final tips for you guys. I think this is very important. I repeat this to every talk I do with the students. Don't settle for less than you deserve. This industry sometimes can be a little bit rough at the beginning, but just find your place, find what you like, but also what you deserve. Don't settle for less. If you try a path and it's not paying enough or like you're struggling, just find something else. Don't get stuck. Find your specialization and combine your translation studies with something else. I think it's important these days to really have something like an add-on. Like as we talked before, maybe something related to marketing, something related to UX, something related to other areas that are adjacent to what you do. Learn everything about language technology. This is very important. Technology is there, here to stay, so the more you know, the more you will be able to leverage it, but in a good way. Identify and communicate your unique value proposition. I think this is important. So what it is that you're adding, how are you position yourself in front of your potential clients or the companies that you are going to apply in the future, and so on and so forth. And build resilience, because this is such a crazy world. So let's go with the flow. Things will work out, and be able to pivot and adapt. And now just a plug to Terra Localizations. In case you're interested, you can look at our website, terralocalizations.com. Also, we're on LinkedIn. Our vendor managers are posting ads quite frequently with looking for translators or testers. So you might be interested in this. And also plugging the AI Log think tank initiative that I mentioned before. In case you're interested in AI, you can follow us, look at our website. We're also on LinkedIn, and we have a newsletter, and everything is for free. It's just insights for you to enjoy, hopefully. And that's it now. That's it. Thank you so much for sticking with me.
Thank you so much, Belen. Wow. You made my job. I'm teaching like a class in 15 minutes. You made my job so much easier because you covered basically a lot of the topics that we will be discussing. So my students are already primed.
Okay, good.
That class. So thank you so much. That was like a great overview. I mean, we are like, over time, but if anyone has any questions,
Yes.
and doesn't have to run,
Yes.
or questions or comments. Yuning, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi.
Hello.
First, thank you, Belen, for your presentation. I'm actually a PhD student doing game localization,
Oh,
and my
nice.
this is LQA, so it's a very inspiring talk you just gave me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My question is actually related to the example of Silk Song, because I'm Chinese and it's kind of a big, like you said, fiasco going on right now. And what happens is the first version of localization was so bad, it has many negative reviews on Steam because, well, most Chinese players don't have access to Twitter or Reddit, so the only place they could give feedback is actually the reviews on. So that's probably one of the reason. And so the developer has to basically hire someone to do the second version, and it's also really bad. So they have to use a friend group's published localization and to implement it into the game to make updates about it. And so my question is, it seems that the developer never really have a clear expectation or grasp of the players' reception until they actually release the game. So my question will be, what kind of support localization could give to the developers, because they obviously don't speak Chinese, they don't really understand Chinese culture. So what kind of support or what can localization do to prevent situations like this?
Yes, that's such a great question, and thank you. I didn't know that the second version was also bad. I didn't follow the drama until that, and then it's super interesting as well that they resorted to fan translation, which was probably much better or at least more attuned to the audience or what they were expecting. So that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing. I really don't know what happened here because usually, I mean, you would first of all hire translators that would like have a better criteria probably. Usually I think in this case there was only one translator and it was not reviewed if I'm not mistaken. So usually when you translate a game you have at least two steps, and if you can have three steps. So you translate, then you review, and then you have a QA or something like that. So at least more people look at the game and at the translations and can have a discussion at least, and maybe that creates a better version. And then they surely didn't do LQA, I believe, because someone else would have noticed this. So I think there were many points in the process where someone would have said, hey, this was not really, this is not attuned to the players in this region. And
Yeah.
clearly they just relied with one person.
Because there were actually two translators in the first version, and you can tell by the different style of wordings inside the game. So there's also consistency in the localization.
So it was not reviewed because they had two translators, but no one actually reviewed it and made it consistent. So really, I think it's such a bad process in this case that they didn't rely on. And that's also the thing when you're a developer, and I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do, but if you're a developer and you don't have a localization team or at least one person in your team, and you go directly to the translators, that it could be an issue because you are just blindly relying on whatever they are doing. When you work with an agency, or at least you have a localization manager inside the company, you have certain processes or, you know, understanding of how things work that can help you prevent this type of backlashes or issues. So I think it's really a process issue and an issue with the lack of understanding of how localization works from the developer, which I don't blame them because if they didn't know better, like what would they have done differently? But I think in a normal process, localization professionals would have seen the issue before. And then other thing that I'm really fascinated to see, but I'm still not seeing clients buying into this that much. It's the service of player research. Some companies have player research teams, but like before launching a game or launching a localization, especially if it's something really tricky, like it was this game that had like a specific flavor that was not like so straightforward, you could like have like a focus group with some players or like do some type of that type of research. I think that would be great. Or if not, if these developers cannot really afford that, at least bring a culturalization expert or consultant, at least for the markets that could backlash. Like so many times like Asian markets are so off the radar of the developers, especially if they are American, that it can like go south. So hiring a culturalization consultant could also help them avoid this, because I mean, I'm sure if you would have been hired as a consultant, you would have looked at the text and say, hey guys, this won't work, right? That would
Very
also,
awkward.
yeah. So yeah, some ideas there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Belen. Are there any other questions? Uh, any comments? I'll make, and I mean, if anyone has to leave, please. I thought it was interesting when you gave like the list of things that you would recommend, like students. And I thought I actually made the same recommendations like 20 years ago, right? So I think we are children. Like, I mean, even like you and me, we have been like, or I've been longer. I'm a little bit older than you, but like, 20 years in the industry or in the field. So we are like kind of like children of the technology turn, right? Like, where technology is an integrative part of translation. So do you see, despite these things having like changed in the sense that you still have to like add technologies to your portfolio, you still have to like add like a specialization, do you see like a fundamental change in this new wave, or do you think it's just like, especially like in your work, do you see like a fundamental change or something that is really, this time is different, or do you feel it's like just another wave of disruption that will like settle down once the craziness is over?
Yes, that's such a good question, Laura. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the second. So I haven't seen in my field, in the work that I'm doing, I haven't seen real disruption. I see a lot of hype, I see a lot of proof of concepts and good ideas, but that are not really in production yet. And at the end, it's like, okay, we have now a fancier way of producing translations, but you still have to have a post editor at the end of it, right? So it hasn't changed that much as compared to machine translation. Now you can do more things, but I haven't seen that fundamental shift yet, and I'm not sure we will see it in the short term. The only thing is that in this transition period is the pressure on implementing AI, reducing costs, like having to again explain why you need humans and so on. So I think it's like a cycle that we go through every few years. But yeah, I haven't really seen that much of a change immediately. And I think, as you said, we were chatting before this session, the book that you read about like taking 10 years to like the technology disruptions to like settle. I think that's what's going to happen this time as well. And LLMs are peaking anyway. Like everyone is telling that LLMs are peaking, that they cannot get better than they are right now with the current architecture. Um, so yeah, I am not afraid in the short term. Well, depending on the day, but yeah, for the most part, I'm hopeful.
Good. That's good. We have to keep the positivity.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you so much, Belen. Thank you everyone that attended. We're gonna finish because it's very late in Spain. You need to go to
Thank
bed
you.
and rest, and we have like a class to teach in 40 minutes now. So thank you so much. And yeah, you will all get an email with the recording and like the slides
Bye-bye.
that Belen will share.
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want, and if you have any questions that you want to send, feel free. I'm always available. Thank you so much, and thank you for
Thanks.
sticking with me.
Thank
Take
you. Thank you
care.
so much. I love the hands.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Belen. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.